Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Tim Buckley, founder of Beyond the Lines. And for anyone joining us for the first time, Beyond the Lines is an internal audit-led platform helping leaders turn good work into better decisions, clearer ownership, and stronger outcomes. A lot of the challenges I talk about are rooted in internal audit transformation, but they rarely belong to internal audit alone. They show up in the messy middle of the work, where audit, risk, and controls and the business all overlap. And that's the purpose of this Leadership Signals series practical conversations about what helps audit risk and controls work better in the real world. For the next 45 minutes, I'm delighted to be joined by Sandro Boeri, Culture and Leadership Advisor to boards and executives. Sandro brings over 40 years of senior leadership experience inside complex, high-pressured organizations, helping boards and executive teams understand how culture, leadership behavior, and business performance connect in practice. Today's session is Culture in Action, how to audit behavior without it becoming subjective. Culture is rarely a problem on paper. Most organizations have values, policies, risk frameworks, and escalation routes. But the harder question is what happens in practice? What gets rewarded, ignored, escalated, and what gets tolerated when the pressure hits? That's where the risk often sits, and increasingly, that is where internal audit is expected to provide insight. So today we'll explore how teams can engage with culture and behavior in a way that's practical, credible, and evidence-based. Please use the QA functionality as we go, and I'll try to bring some of those questions into the conversation where we can. So Sandro, thanks again for joining me. I'd love to hand over to you for a brief introduction before we get started.
Thank you very much, Tim. Let me try and summarize 45 years of work, 65 years on the planet, and why on earth I'm sitting there talking to you about culture. I conducted my first internal audit review at the age of 18 years old in 1979, probably before computers were invented, and had a pretty traditional internal audit upbringing in the banking industry. Uh, then had a few other roles, compliance, operational risk, and then had my first midlife crisis and set up my own business, a business called Risk Audit that was focused on recruitment and training of auditors. During that business phase is when I witnessed the global financial crisis. In other words, the explosion of banks like Lehman Brothers, RBS, and so on. And that's when the penny dropped for me, that I started understanding that actually culture really is at the root cause of some of the world's largest disasters, also some of the world's largest success stories.
Mm-hmm.
And as internal auditors, we've got a very simple choice. We can continue to pretend that human beings behave in a logical, common sense fashion, or we can look at the realities of life and embrace the human condition. So, my second midlife crisis took me to Deutsche Bank, where I had the opportunity to work on auditing culture as well as developing their 900 auditors. And now I'm here today as a keynote speaker, consultant, co-author of the topical requirements on organisational behaviour on behalf of the Global Institute of Internal Auditors. I'm still a council member on the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors for 2 or 3 more months, and I sit on the board of the European Confederation of Institutes of Internal Audit. So it's a privilege to be here, Tim, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Yeah, it's a privilege to have you, and really, we've got no one better to talk about culture and behavior with. So, yeah, let's get into it. So, the first question I've got really is to set the scene for the audience. Why is auditing culture and behavior becoming a bigger topic for internal audit now, and why is this a timely conversation for internal audit teams?
I would say circumstances. Let me explain what I mean. Culture has been an important topic since Adam met Eve. And as internal auditors, we've carried on talking about it. The people we audit have carried on talking about it, but we haven't had a lot of success as a profession in actually pinning down what it practically means, what this abstract concept means.
Hmm.
Then the topical requirements came along. So, what are the topical requirements? They are a mandatory auditing standard for internal auditors on auditing particular themes. So, we've got the topical requirement on cyber, we've got the topical requirement on third party risk, and I'm delighted that the Global Institute put culture as the third item on the agenda. And I was shocked and surprised to be invited into the working group. and perhaps it was an opportunistic moment to influence a document that I know is a compulsory mandatory document if you care about your reputation as a professional internal audit function.
Yeah.
That's why I think we're talking about culture today, unless people have suddenly been converted and think this is the most wonderful thing and we have to do it. Call me a cynic, but I'm hoping that our mindsets will change over the passage of time.
No, exactly. And that was actually my next question was what are you hoping this shift will achieve in practice? So as you say, becoming part of our mindset, not necessarily being driven by the topical requirements, but actually people seeing the benefit of auditing behavior in organizations. But what else do you hope this shift will bring about in the profession and wider than that?
I'm hoping it'll bring around a curiosity in the human condition. Let me explain what I practically mean. If you're auditing cyber risk, you can't audit cyber risk effectively without understanding what generation of firewall are you dealing with,
Yeah.
what antivirus software do you have, how does social engineering work, and so on. In other words, you've got to get into the nitty gritty and become subject matter experts.
Yeah.
By having organizational behavior on the agenda in this mandatory fashion, I think it stimulates a conversation as to what's all this about? What are the
Hmm.
dynamics of it? So, my hope is that if you and I are talking to each other in 2 or 3 years' time, just as it's common for every internal audit function to hire a technology auditor, it'll be common for every internal audit function to hire someone that is either qualified or skilled in behavioral science. That's my
Hmm.
hope.
That's great. And yeah, I mean, a future that looks like that, I think would be fantastic. And this is a area that I'm extremely passionate about as well. So definitely share your views on that one. Um, why do you think this matters now for the future of the profession? And why do you think people, that are on this webinar shouldn't just see this as a niche topic or a side issue that, I'm going to learn a little bit more about? What's the sort of true driver of this?
So there was a very sobering piece of research published by the Global Institute of Internal Auditors called Vision 2035.
Hmm.
And what the research concludes is that there's a general perception that our profession is the corporate police person, the
Yeah.
corporate compliance person, but certainly a person who's very much focused on history and what went wrong.
Hmm.
And the conclusion of this research is unless we change as a profession, unless we become more focused on foresight and insight, we're going to become irrelevant.
Yeah.
Now, I would hate the profession I've worked in for many years to become irrelevant. So, how does this particular topic help? Well, just imagine the following conversation with a chief executive officer. So, sir, we've had a few challenges. We've got projects that are not being properly implemented. We've been hacked into our systems. I'd like to share some insights with you. I'd like to tell you that one of the key root causes of these problems is culture. Ah, but what do you mean, Mr. Auditor? Well, let me go into a bit more detail. What I mean is that we've got challenges with the way we hire people in terms of understanding their values and character. The
Hmm.
training that we offer is doesn't make it's not contextual and therefore people are switching off. The communications from our leaders is inconsistent and is certainly not cascaded down to the middle management.
Yeah.
And I'm giving you some reasons as to why some of the challenges we've had in the past have happened. But going forward, we've got some really exciting projects coming up. If we can just handle these pressure points, then we've got every chance that these projects will succeed as opposed to fail like the last project failed. Imagine that conversation. That's a foresight orientated conversation.
Yeah.
I would want to employ that auditor straight away. I'd want to give them a large budget and I would
Yeah.
want them to succeed.
It just completely resets the conversation, doesn't it? Because
Yeah.
I mean, I think, when I joined, started my internal audit career, there very much still was that
How many
perception
years
of
ago was that, Tim?
around 18.
Okay.
So yeah, so there was very much a perception of, you're the compliance police, you're here to come in, tick and bash, check a few boxes, tell us what's wrong and leave. And from an as an early auditor, I thought, well, we had so much value like to that. We know we have a unique position where we really understand the whole business. We interact at different layers, different functions throughout the whole organization. So we really do bring a lot of insight. But as a profession, even the way I was being taught, I didn't feel we were showing that. It was very backwards looking.
Yeah.
And I think, now with AI moving things at such pace, we really can't afford to be backward looking anymore. So completely aligned on the foresight there,
Yeah. Great opportunity for us.
definitely. So for our attendees that might be unfamiliar with this topic, can you explain why auditing culture is not fundamentally different to auditing anything else?
Okay. So we needed to build a bridge between an abstract word, culture, to the world we all know and love, the world of the risk-based internal audit engagement.
Hmm.
So the first criteria to build that bridge is you need a risk. So we came up with a risk. It's called behavioral risk.
Hmm.
Behavioral risk is what? It's the risk that the employees of an organization do not behave in a manner that supports the achievement of the strategic objectives of that organization. So that immediately elevates this subject into a subject of strategic importance, which is good,
Yes.
coming back to where we started this conversation. So if you've got a risk, then surely an organization needs to manage or mitigate that risk.
Hmm.
And one way of doing that is using some activities. Well, if those activities are important, they're key controls. So what we're saying to auditors is we want you to look for evidence that certain key controls in certain arenas are properly designed and operating effectively. Now,
Yeah.
which arenas are we talking about? Well, we're talking some arenas that every single experienced internal auditor ought to be able to get their head around. Well, we're not asking anyone to become a behavioral scientist on the 15th of December this year.
Yes.
So, behavioral science tells us that the way you hire, the way you train, the way you reward, the way leaders communicate, the way we remediate, these are five themes that are critical to influencing the way human beings behave.
Hmm.
So, very simply, what we're asking you to do is to embed a review of control pressure points in these five areas into your day-to-day internal audit work. We're only asking you to do it if you believe behavioral risk exists in your
Okay.
organization. Good luck with explaining that it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Um, there is an Argentinian gentleman, the president, who's trying to come up with a law that legislates for the creation of totally autonomous AI companies. And I accept that may be an area where there are no human beings involved. But
Okay.
even
Yes.
even in OpenAI, in Microsoft, in Amazon, you've got human beings involved in some of the world's most sophisticated large
Yeah.
language models. So behavioral risk exists everywhere. What we're asking people to do is to embed the review of this theme into their day-to-day audit work. That's the short example.
Okay. So rather than being, a completely separate behavioral audit, we embed this into our day-to-day work, into our day-to-day engagements, or can we do a
Okay.
combination of both?
I think you can do a combination of both. There's nothing in the
Yeah.
topical requirement that says thou shalt not do the audit of culture.
Yeah.
But um, if that becomes your first foray into this world, what you're doing is you're effectively conducting an audit where the most important stakeholder in the organization is potentially at risk of being told that the one key thing he or she thinks they do wonderfully well, in other words, manage culture, they're actually
Hmm.
doing a crap job on. That's politically, that doesn't work. So,
No, it's not great to sell this either, is it? To start at
no.
that level, yeah.
So what we're saying is build a tactical plan,
Hmm.
build a 3-year plan, perhaps,
Yeah.
where start by embedding the review of key controls into your day-to-day work, maybe year one. Maybe year two, then start to look at frameworks. And maybe year three, you're in a position to objectively critique the
Yeah.
framework that probably doesn't exist in many organizations. I mean, how many people in this room would put their a hand up and say, we have an holistic behavioral risk management framework? I guess very
Yeah.
few.
Very few, yes.
So let's build up to this subject. But I'm hoping that over a 3-year period, organizations can audit this theme ground floor, thematically, top down. But what they're
Hmm.
auditing is how does your organization manage behavioral risk?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so that leads to my next question nicely. So, in your view, how can auditing culture and behavior not be seen as fluffy, overly subjective? Like, how can we ground this in evidence? Because that's, I think, one of the main challenges I get from people is, this feels very subjective. I don't have a simple control attribute to tick this against. How do I do
Okay.
this?
Look, there is no rule book that tells you what good looks like or what you must do in terms of managing behavioral risk. I mean, I'm actually working on a book, but that will never become a rule book.
Yeah,
But equally, there is no rule book that tells you how to manage cyber risk properly, how to
no.
manage credit risk properly. There are opinions, there are standards, there are
Hmm.
commentators out there. So the first thing we have to do is we've got to try and understand what good looks like. So please read the user guide to the topical requirement. It's full of suggestions.
Yeah.
And these are examples of what good looks like. So what we're asking you to do is to benchmark the design aspect of a key control in this arena versus what good looks like. And if it doesn't
Hmm.
meet that benchmark, you must raise an audit finding. By the way, I'm finding a lot of audit functions are still not raising audit findings unless they've found examples of what's gone wrong.
Okay.
So can we please remind ourselves of what global internal audit standards say? You must raise audit findings. You must comment if something isn't properly designed. You don't have to
Yeah.
wait to bayonet the wounded after the event.
Yeah, we're not always focused on operating effectiveness. We see that design, we raise it there and then.
So there's nothing abstract, there's nothing woolly or fluffy
No.
about benchmarking with a set of criteria what good looks like.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing I would say is uh, we've got to repeat this and we've got to repeat this again and again and again. When we're accused of dealing in the abstract, every single word in that topical requirement has been benchmarked against researched behavioral science.
Hmm.
So this is not something that Sandro and Vika Scholten, who was my co-author, made up over a glass of wine. This is based on years of behavioral scientific
Yeah.
research. This is a scientific subject. And as auditors, we are observers, we're data scientists. We measure, we analyze, we conclude. It's no
Yeah.
different on this subject.
I think that's a really good point. I know a lot of clients that I work with, when they hear culture, they straight away go to subjective, but really that's a form of pushback. And actually, if we can reiterate, the science behind this, and then that helps
Yeah. If you
drive
don't
this
like the word
forward.
culture, then replace it with behavioral risk. That's the
Yeah.
reason this is called the topical requirement on organizational behavior. We drop the word culture precisely for this reason.
That makes sense.
Behavior is very tangible. Behavior leaves audit trails.
Hmm.
Culture, what do you mean by culture? Well, what I mean by culture is about a pattern of human behavior.
Yeah, that makes sense. We've got a couple of questions, but I'm just going to ask one more of mine, and then we'll
Of
go over
course.
to Q&A
Yeah.
for a while. So, again, for the participants on the call that maybe not as familiar with this, can you give some flavor of the most common examples where we might see this showing up in the real world? I mentioned a few in my intro around sort of hiring and promotion, incentives,
Yeah.
consequences. But it'd be good to just give that flavor so people can start
Yeah.
to understand.
Let's use a cyber example, and let's just quickly work this through the topical requirement.
Yeah.
So, I want to make sure that my cyber risk controls protect my organization from being destroyed by hackers.
Hmm.
So, where might I look from a behavioral risk perspective? Well, let's start at the people we're hiring. If we're hiring someone into our IT risk team, they're going to have to deal with dilemmas. So, for example, they want to install the urgent patch, and the
Yeah.
business basically wants them to go away because they've got some day-to-day important stuff to deal with. That's a wonderful case study to submit a potential candidate through to understand from a values perspective, from a character perspective, how do they deal with these human dilemmas where they're not
Hmm.
being able to do their job? Number one. Number two, let's deal with training. Does everyone understand the importance of cyber risk? Um, does anyone understand that they have a personal stake in when something goes wrong in cyber risk? Do they understand how they personally could be impacted if their data is compromised, for example? So, looking at the training as to whether it's contextual as opposed to tick box training.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done
Thirdly,
my phishing training once a year
exactly
and it's
tick,
done.
and then
Yeah.
you go and click on the URL, yeah.
And then you click
Um,
on the yeah.
um, are we incentivizing and disincentivizing compliance with cyber policies and procedures?
Hmm.
If we don't punish or we don't encourage with money, with praise, with promotion, those behaviors, then is it any wonder that people are going to ignore our cyber policies and procedures?
Yeah.
And finally, tone. Tone at the top, tone in the middle. Is there evidence that our leaders are talking about cyber risk? But are they
Hmm.
talking about it in a way which is authentic? And once again,
Yeah.
the user guide goes into detail. These are just some examples of what good looks like from a behavioral risk perspective in relation to cyber risk management. You can overlay behavioral risk onto any theme. I mean, I'm still trying to work out what Thomas Tuchel did at halftime last night that
Yeah.
transforms the fortunes of the English football team. The
Yeah.
topical requirement was in action in that dressing room, without a doubt.
Yeah. So you really can overlay this to virtually any situation. And I think
Yes.
what you said about tone is really important, tone at the top. And I also focus on tone in action. So, our leaders actually live in and breathe in what they're saying. When targets are being missed, when the pressure's on, when there's an incident, are we really living and breathing those principles?
Absolutely. I mean, there's an article I published yesterday called it's about a model called Grace,
Hmm.
which is a model that helps guide a leader as to how to say sorry.
Okay.
So, if you want a psychologically safe environment, and so, by the way, we kept psychological safety out of the topical requirement because it does require behavioral scientific expertise. But if you want someone to be believed when they're saying sorry, then they've got to say sorry in a particular way.
Hmm.
So, I would urge readers to have a look at this Grace model. It's a fascinating way of saying sorry in an authentic fashion, and that's a subcomponent of tone at the top.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's definitely something for our listeners to look at after this, the Grace model. Um, okay, so I'll come to Q&A. So we've got a question from Kieran. Across the multitude of locations that you've worked in, what are the challenges around the spread of common values in multiple locations?
Great, great question. Um, let me give you a polarized example.
Hmm.
Um, there are certain locations where the educational system, where the legal system creates a particular tone that indicates what we in the UK might determine to be corrupt behavior is actually good business.
Okay.
And I can pretend that's not the case if I'm dealing internationally, or internationally, I can try and understand what are the multicultural attitudes to a common challenge. In other words, do I pay somebody a backhander or not?
Hmm.
But what I would say is, can we look at this to a degree of depth? So in the United States, you've got the Foreign and Corrupt Practices Act.
Yeah.
There was the most wild tone at the top set by the President of the United States, who basically said, we don't want people being prosecuted for breaching the US Foreign and Corrupt Practices Act.
Okay.
So all of a sudden, don't be surprised if over the next few years, culturally, giving people backhanders doesn't become accepted business practice in the United States of America because the
Hmm.
tone at the top has said, if you do that, I'm not going to punish you. Now,
They've
it didn't
essentially
say,
greenlit that. Yeah.
it didn't say I'm going to encourage you to break the law. That wasn't said at all.
No.
But it's what wasn't said, and what was said is a remarkable tone. So what I would advocate is be curious in each country as to what people believe is okay and what people believe is not okay. Approach the subject with a curiosity,
Yeah.
and you'll end up in the right place.
Yeah. I think that's really good advice. Don't go in with a predisposed idea, be open, be curious, and try
Yeah,
and really understand, what is driving this. Is
yeah,
this bad behavior, or is this a cultural norm that maybe you're not used to from your home location?
yeah. Try and understand it. And if you then want to change people's behaviors, so um, I saw this at Deutsche Bank. I was trying to train auditors in 15 different countries
Hmm.
where you've got these cultural variances in norms. You've got to find a way, not of preaching at somebody saying this is wrong. Well, it may be wrong in your country, but it's not wrong in my country.
Yeah.
You've got to try and find a way of telling stories as to how the behavior impacts individual human beings. So you're
Hmm.
talking to the person as an individual human being. You're not instructing, you're not preaching at that person. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, the little voice in the head says, switches off and says, why should I listen to you? You haven't bothered looking at my environment, trying to understand my world.
Yeah. And that's where the empathy, storytelling,
Yes.
skills really come into play there.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Going to one more question from the Q&A. So we've got from Bhavesh, how do you convince the board that an audit of behavioral risk is beneficial? How can we tangibly demonstrate the benefit of such an audit?
I try and find a problem in the organization that is hurting the board, and I start to give them insights as to why this problem may be occurring for behavioral risk orientated reasons, in other words, culture.
Hmm.
And I start to provide them with some solutions related to the problem. So, in very short terms, try and find something which is causing pain.
Okay.
And where something's causing pain, I've yet to meet a senior director who's not interested in a solution.
Hmm.
But build a few allies because sometimes um, you don't want to get into the game of blame. So try and
No.
find out who's most at pain, who's the board pointing the finger at. Don't necessarily go and knock on that person's door and say you've got the culture wrong. But any project that's failed, any regulatory problem, any strategic initiative which is failing is an opportunity. There
Yeah.
is an alternative. Try and find something which is wildly successful and try and use the philosophy of the topical requirement to make some suggestions how it can be leveraged to make the organization even more successful.
Yeah.
But in the short term, where there is pain, there is opportunity.
Okay. No, I think that's great advice and a couple of ways to leverage that there. Okay, we'll go back to a couple of my questions and then we'll come back to a few
Yeah.
more Q&A because we've got those coming in. Um, So, what can internal audit functions do now to start building confidence and capability before the December requirement effective date?
Okay. Step one, look at your audit universe and ask yourself which components lend themselves to looking at the design of key controls in these control pressure point arenas that I've spoken about.
Hmm.
Which components lend themselves to doing operating effectiveness work? So, in other words, classify your audit universe as to what type of work can you do where.
Yeah.
Step two, you've got to produce a 27 audit plan.
Hmm.
Um, Decide in which audits am I going to design effectiveness and operating effectiveness. And I would say that this is based on your existing risk assessment protocols.
Yeah.
The only difference is you probably have to introduce a new risk that doesn't exist in your risk taxonomy. It's called behavioral risk. If
Yeah.
it exists, or if it's called people risk, but please
Hmm.
look at the labeling of people risk, then use your existing taxonomy. So, from a process perspective, there's a risk assessment piece.
Yeah.
The next area is training. You've got to, if you've got a large audit function, you've got to train your auditors. If you've got a small audit function, you've probably got to train yourself
Yeah.
as to what exactly am I going to look at? How am I going to benchmark good?
Hmm.
So there's a training piece. And then there's a stakeholder management piece. So if I'm talking to business executives, the chief executive officer, My, can I use the word propaganda? Sorry, marketing campaign. My marketing campaign
Yeah.
is essentially based around talking to them about, look, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you some insights as to how we can improve the way we do things to increase the chances of doing things well. So just start to talk about what may feel slightly different.
Okay.
For the chair of the audit committee and the audit committee, you've clearly got to tell them about the topical requirement and you've got to tell them what your tactical plan is for
Yeah.
implementing the topical requirement. These are some of the things that I think are better done now
Hmm.
than after the event. If you just want to tick the box, ask yourself the question, when's my next EQA scheduled and can I afford to wait? But
Yeah.
that's box ticking. I'd like to think as a profession, we're better than that.
Definitely. No, there's some great advice there. If I come back to the Q&A then, so we've got a question here from Anonymous. In your experience, which areas tend to show the biggest behavioral gaps? Escalation, decision making, accountability?
I would say areas where the stakes are incredibly high. I've spent a large part of my career in the world of investment banking. And, well, if you want to have a look at the world of investment banking, have a look at the SpaceX flotation on Friday and just
Yeah.
have a look at the figures. A number of investment banks generated $500 million in fees for that business.
Wow.
So, from a monetary perspective, the stakes are enormous.
Yeah.
If so, therefore, I have seen some of the biggest behavioral challenges in this arena, and those behavioral challenges have caused unknown misery to people. When an investment bank explodes, it creates a hole in a government's finances. I still
Yeah.
believe that um, some of the political mishaps we're seeing at the moment, I'm putting it mildly, were a direct cause of cultural problems in the investment bank arena.
Okay.
Some of the worst treatment of human beings that I've seen, should we call it toxic culture,
Hmm.
I've seen in the world of investment bankings, where
Yeah.
the way people have been treated verges actually was criminal.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that, Sandro. Okay, so we've got a question from Jazdeep. How do senior leaders demonstrate that ethical behaviors is more important than short-term financial targets, i.e., do we tolerate poor culture because it leads to good financial results?
Okay. Step one, a senior leader has to define what they mean by the word ethics, because
Hmm.
I don't know what ethical behavior is. I'm being slightly provocative. What,
Yes, yes.
what, we live in a world of grey, not black and white.
Yeah.
So therefore, the senior leader has to talk about the dilemmas that they face every day. So storytelling and talking about dilemmas is important.
Yeah.
Secondly, um, basically sharing stories about how that leader has personally dealt with behavior which is in the on the wrong side of the ethical red line
Hmm.
is critical. So walking the talk with stories, with examples is absolutely critical. But I think it's just as important to talk about success stories in relation to ethical behavior. So if you as a senior leader can demonstrate that ethical behavior is good for business, talk about it,
Yeah.
sing about it, get everyone to sing about it. It's absolutely critical.
I think that's key. And for me, that all comes back to transparency. I mean, being completely open and honest about, yeah, like you say, where you draw the line with what is and what isn't ethical behavior. So many organizations are scared to do that because, like you say, we operate in shades of grey. They're scared to draw that line, but I think it is really important. And then everyone in the business is essentially singing from the same hymn sheet, but they can see what is and what isn't acceptable.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, great. So we've got a couple more questions. What is the biggest way to communicate culture-related findings without appearing judgmental?
So the topical requirement itself is specifically designed that you are communicating findings perhaps without even using the word culture. You're communicating
Okay.
findings on hiring, you're communicating findings on training, on incentives, and so on. So there's nothing judgmental about your findings in that arena.
Hmm.
Where I think we need to be careful is because there are other layers of work that we can do. I'll give you an example. We can observe behavior. So we can observe that we are not seeing any evidence of younger people, inexperienced people being given the opportunity to speak in a meeting.
Okay.
Okay. Now, you can communicate what you've seen in two ways. You can basically say, I have seen a pattern of behavior where young people are not given the opportunity to speak. That's great. Bad
Mhm.
is we operate in a psychologically unsafe environment. What's your evidence? I've seen a pattern where young people are not being given the opportunity to speak. Well, that doesn't mean it's psychologically unsafe. There could be 200 other reasons
Yeah.
why young people are not speaking in an environment.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the point I'm trying to make is please do not jump to conclusions without vast amounts of scientific evidence.
Yeah.
The third work, the most potent work in this arena is trying to understand what drives human behavior. So to say this person is not risk aware,
Hmm.
this person does not care about risk culture based on 10 audit findings with poor controls. Sorry, that's not a scientific, there's no correlation between cause and effect there that stands up to
No.
scrutiny in scientific terms. We're making that mistake as a profession every single day of the week.
Yeah.
And we've got to stop. We've got to stop doing that because it's actually discrediting our ability to audit in this arena.
Yeah. That's great. So stick to the facts, don't jump to the conclusions,
Yes.
show the observations. Yeah.
Yes.
Great. So question here from me. So how can auditing behavior become part of normal audit planning and delivery, and what can a mature approach look like over time? I know you mentioned to do this incrementally over the next 3 years. How do you see that maturing?
So the way I see it maturing is, and I was working with a client yesterday where we were introducing this methodology, is lowest common denominator of work is the topical requirement.
Hmm.
But as auditors, we are wonderful observers. We've got this vantage point across the organization. So why don't we start collecting observations relating to the way leaders lead, the way the organization reflects, the way meetings are conducted, and so on? Why don't we start collecting observations and why don't we start sharing insights? So for me, that's the next evolution. The final evolution for me is a behavioral scientific evolution. Why don't we start interviewing people, conducting focus group activity, conducting surveys that enable us to scientifically understand what is driving the behavior?
Hmm.
So it could be that behavior is driven by incentives.
Yeah.
It could be that behavior is driven by FOMO.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the world's largest financial services sector frauds were driven by FOMO.
Hmm.
So if you can understand that, it's much easier then to come up with remedies to start to actually alter the behavioral driver. That's the most powerful work. But to
Yeah.
do that, we're going to need to be qualified in behavioral science.
Hmm.
But I do see our profession evolving, and some people, maybe on this call, are already there. If
Yeah.
you look at the audit functions of Citigroup, HSBC, Standard Chartered Bank, ING, these are all examples of functions that actually do employ behavioral scientists to do precisely this work.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I think, it follows the trend of the industry to, traditionally a lot of internal auditors were Big Four ACA qualified accountants. And we're moving beyond that now. We're looking at, well,
Yes.
what other skills do we need to bring into this team to make it a more well-rounded team to do
Yeah,
the job properly?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a few more Q&As that I'll try and get through before we wrap up in 5 minutes. So, do you see an issue doing a culture audit within a centralized organization, ways of working, decision making? It may seem we are basically auditing management board. Do you think this works in in all organizational styles, centralized, decentralized?
I just think we need to tailor the way we audit to whether an organization is centralized or decentralized. I
Hmm.
do think in a highly centralized organization where authority flows from the top, we are auditing the activities of board directors.
Yeah.
There was a very, now quite an elderly gentleman said to me once, Sandro, internal audit has no business auditing the activities of the board. Well, my answer to him then was, don't be so ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's my answer to him now in even more vociferous terms.
Hmm.
So whether it's decentralized, if it's a decentralized environment, what it means from a behavioral risk perspective is we need to be prepared to find that you're going to have control processes designed in very different ways depending on where you are in the business. And that's not
Yeah.
good or bad. That's
No.
just a design feature of an organization.
Yeah, that makes sense. Great. So the next question we've got is what advice would you give to managing persistent team conflict that's negatively impacting work output, particularly where an organization believes all reasonable steps have been taken and staff dissatisfaction remains? How can we help as an internal audit team?
I think we can help by using the topical requirement. We can, it could be that the HR function thinks, look, we've done everything we can do. Well, have you? Could we benchmark what you've done against that topical requirement? Obviously, I'm not, I know I've spoken about the topical requirement a lot. That's not the terminology I'm going to use. But
Hmm.
what I'm going to say is, have we really looked at the way we're hiring, the way we're training, the way we're incentivizing, the way we're communicating, the way we're telling stories? I guarantee you there is still room for improvement. I believe
Yeah.
chances are you've not exhausted every possibility.
Okay. That's great. We'll do one more Q&A and then my last question here. So if you had to recommend one immediate step for internal audit functions to start assessing behavior more effectively, what would it be?
Read the topical requirement and come up with a tactical plan for implementing it.
Hmm.
Come up with a phase one, which is what must we do by Christmas,
Yeah,
and where do we want to be by Christmas 2027?
great advice. Okay, last question from me, and then I'll hand over to you, Sandro, to give any sort of parting
Yeah.
words that you want before my outro. So, why do you believe this is an opportunity for internal audit teams rather than just another requirement, another thing that we've got to comply to? What's the big opportunity here?
If you put yourselves in the shoes of a board or a chief executive officer, they're getting out of bed every day, worried as to how can they get their employees to do what they need them to do for that company to be successful and for them,
Hmm.
for themselves to be successful. Well, that's what this subject is all about, is how can we influence human beings to do what they need to do to achieve the strategic objectives. This subject is totally linked to what drives the most senior people in an organization every single day of the week.
Hmm. I think that's great. So, Sandra, is there anything else that you would like to share with the attendees before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, by now you would have seen I've got a passion for this subject. I'm 65 years old, and I would like to be a small part of a group of people that moves the dial on this subject. So if you want to know more about it, by all means, connect with me on LinkedIn. By all means, sign up to my Culture Matters newsletter. By all means, employ me to speak at your conference if you want. And obviously, I'm more than happy to go into more detail on this subject. But for me, it's now become my final life passion project, or certainly working life passion project.
I love that. I love that. Sandro, thank you so much. That was a really thoughtful and powerful conversation. I really appreciate the way you kept bringing it back to real work, real behavior, real organizational decisions, so we can move beyond just that sort of theory that's out there. And thank you to everyone that's joined us live. For me, today's discussion captured exactly why this topic matters. Culture is not just what's written down, it shows up in what gets escalated, challenged, rewarded, especially when the pressure hits. If internal audit wants to stay relevant and useful, it cannot only look at whether a process exists on paper, it needs to understand whether behavior supports the decisions, controls, and outcomes that the organization says it wants. And I think, we've really covered that today. This is also really closely linked to the work that I'm building at Beyond the Lines. especially with the new board trusted CAE toolkit, which I'm going to be launching soon. The toolkit is designed to help audit leaders and teams move from insight to action. And there's practical tools in there around decision ready assurance, ownership, reporting, follow through, and audit impact. And the aim of this toolkit really is simple: less control theatre, more decisions, ownership, and outcomes. So I'm going to be opening access to that soon at a founding price. And the weekly Beyond the Lines newsletter is where I'll share that first. So if you want early access or you're interested about learning more about this, then please make sure you're subscribed to the newsletter. And yeah, I'd just like to say thank you again for joining us. And Sandro, thank you so much for your time and insight today. It's been an amazing conversation.
Thank you very much.
Take care, everyone.